All right, guys, we're going to continue on with Song for a Whale, Chapter 6. The secretary was picking up the phone when she saw me coming, and I waved her on my way into Principal Sheldon's office. Miss Sheldon wasn't there, so I went ahead and rearranged the furniture. I slid the black chair over to one side of the desk. Mr. Charles would sit there, so I could see both him and Miss Sheldon at the same time. I sank into my favorite chair and stared at the ceiling while I waited. Miss Sheldon came in and sat behind her desk, then held out her arms as if she were saying, "Well?" I shrugged. No point in chatting until Mr. Charles got there. I reached up to the pendant I wore around my neck, the one made from an old Zenith radio knob. They used to emboss the wooden knobs with a raised Z-shaped lightning bolt. In my room at home, I had a collection of antique radios. I did some repair work for Mr. Gunner's antique shop, and sometimes, okay, a lot of the times, I ended up buying radios for him after I fixed them. I'd made the pendant so I'd have a piece of my collection with me even when I was away from home. While we waited, I traced the jagged edges of the letter with my fingertip. Mr. Charles came in a few minutes later. "Welcome," I signed as he took the seat across from me. I pointed to a picture on Miss Shelton's desk that I hadn't seen before. "New grandbaby?" "Yes, that's Henry," she said after Mr. Charles interpreted my question. "Now tell me what happened in the cafeteria." Miss Shelton knew what happened. I was sure of that. She always wanted to get my side of the story. One of those things they teach in principal school. Find out what happened, then question to kids to see if they lie about it. Mr. Charles interpreted between Miss Sheldon and me as I filled her in. "Nina was only trying to ask what you were having for lunch," she said. I actually slapped myself in the forehead. All of this because Nina wanted to know what kind of sandwich I had? She was trying to make conversation with you, Iris, to be friendly. "No, she's not," I signed. "She's trying to show off and pretend she knows something she doesn't. She needs to keep her hands out of my face." Miss Sheldon reminded me of the school's zero tolerance policy for fighting. I tried to argue that I was only removing someone's hands from my personal space, but it was no use. At school, that counted as fighting. "This isn't fair." I slumped back in the chair and looked out the window at the parking lot. Mr. Charles waved to get my attention and interpreted the rest of what Miss Sheldon said. The other students at the lunch table did say you tried to get Nina to stop when she got so close to you. We'll talk to her about respecting personal space. If it happens again, tell a teacher instead of shoving someone. Okay. I left it at that. Miss Sheldon probably wouldn't like if I pointed out that shoving was a lot quicker than flagging a teacher down and scribbling a note to explain what was going on. I'd have in-school suspension for the next 2 days starting right then. That meant I would sit in one room all day, and my teachers would send my work there. Fine with me. Regular suspension would have been even better. At home, I could fly through my schoolwork and then start on some radio repairs. That was probably why they didn't do it, because they figured out it was too much like a vacation. Then Miss Sheldon slipped in the worst part. "And you have to apologize to Nina when you return to class." Maybe she'd forget about that. By the end of the school day, I had a text from Mom, "Get straight home after school." Of course, Miss Sheldon had called her to let her know of my sentencing. I biked towards home after school, but I wasn't in a big hurry to get there. My parents told me I'd be in serious trouble if I got sent to the principal's office again, even though there was a whole month left of school. I wasn't sure what they meant by serious trouble, but some things were better left a mystery. That morning, I had been working on a radio repair for Mr. Gunner, a mint-colored Zenith from the 1950s. That's why I was so late getting to school. I was so close to fixing it, but then realized I didn't have what I needed to finish the job. Mr. Gunner wasn't in a hurry. He always told me to take the time I needed to do the job right. But I couldn't stand to leave anything sitting around broken. It chased me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The junkyard was on the way home. Sort of. At the gate of Moe's Junk Emporium, I hopped off my bike even before it stopped rolling. My eyes scanned the dead appliance section as I ran up the sidewalk. Always so many dishwashers and washing machines. But there was a monster-sized TV, radio, record player set. Not that it had a big screen. I mean, it was thick. You'd have to set it at least 3 feet away from the wall. I ran over for a closer look. Made by Admiral. In the 1950s, I'm pretty sure. The set featured decades of dust that had sunk into the scratches of the wood cabinet and tatters of cloth hanging from the speaker. Hopefully the insides were in much better shape. The TV and record player weren't in much use, but the radio might have the exact parts I need. I took out my phone to text Grandpa. It was the kind of thing he'd pick up for me before someone else grabbed it. I typed a few words before I caught myself. Sometimes I'd think of something to tell him before remembering he wasn't there to answer me. Then I felt bad for forgetting. Shouldn't I always feel it, missing him? After erasing a message, I changed it to "Wish you were still here." Even though he wouldn't received it, I clicked send before slipping the phone back into my pocket. He seemed closer then, just like sending that short message would somehow let him know I was still thinking of him. I haven't forgotten you. Sometimes I just don't remember you're not here. My brother Tristan would drive or could drive me back later to get the set, but it might be gone by then. If I asked Mom and Dad to pick it up, they'd wonder why I was at Moe's instead of home. I'd ask Mo to hold it for me. He knew me well enough by now, so it would take just a minute to tell him I was interested in the set. But when I ran into the trailer that served the office, Mo wasn't behind the desk smoking a cigar like he always was. Some guy a little older than Tristan sat there, watching a TV show where people threw chairs at one another. The patch on his blue work shirt read Jimmy Joe. Jimmy Joe stood up and said something like when he noticed me in the doorway. I never liked talking to people I didn't know, but this was an emergency, so I would. But by talk, I mean write notes back and forth. I hated the way people looked at me when they didn't understand my deaf accent. Since I didn't know if I talked very well, I'd rather not do it at all. Plus, I never liked the way my voice felt. As much as I loved feeling sound from a radio speaker, vibrations in my throat annoyed me, as if they didn't belong there. Kind of like how I loved electronics, but not in my own ears. At the desk, I scribbled on a notepad. Can you save that Admiral set out there for me? I'll come back for it later. He looked at me after reading the note, and his face was a question. I pointed to my ear and then shook my head to let him know these ears were as busted as everything else around here. His eyes widened like they did with most people. A second of panic, like they're not sure what to do with me, or like I might explode in front of them. Can you, read lips? Or talk? Pointing back and forth between his mouth and mine. Maybe, I thought, but how about just reading that note in your hand? I tapped the paper he was holding. He recovered and then pointed out the window. It doesn't work. His mouth was really wide when he formed the words. He was probably yelling. He shook his head and waved his hands to emphasize the point. I held back an eye roll. Of course it didn't work. Even if it worked, it really wouldn't work. Those old antenna TVs hadn't been able to get a signal for years. After taking back the note, I wrote, for parts. When he read that, his eyes rose from scared to impressed. I'll ask my dad, Jimmy Joe wrote back. Doctor appointment. He'll be back soon. So Mo was his dad. From what I had witnessed during my time as a junkyard customer, Mo started each day with a can of Budweiser and a whole hog breakfast sandwich from the cattle prod, in addition to the cigar, so a doctor visit was probably a good idea. Too bad he didn't pick a more convenient day to start caring about his health. I added, tell him it's for Iris. Thanks. While Jimmy Joe read that, I tore another page from the pad, wrote my name on it, and then ripped a piece of tape from the dispenser on the desk. Without waiting for a response, I ran outside and slapped the Iris Bailey note on the Admiral. It was almost mine. Even though I was in serious trouble, I smiled the whole way home. Chapter 7. Tristan wasn't home yet when I got back, but more importantly, neither was Mom. I'd have a chance to work on my radios before she came in to lecture me. I ran up to my room where my radio collection filled shelves across 3 walls. I'd have to add a new shelf soon. Tools and electronic parts and wires covered the workbench I'd made from an old door. My mom said it looked like a robot factory exploded in my room, but I knew where to find everything. Most people were surprised when they found out I fixed old radios, but that was because most people didn't notice that sound moves. If it's strong enough, it can move anything. Its waves can break glass or shake the ground or deafen a whale. Even if they're not strong, sound waves tremble radios too. That was why I didn't need to hear one to know if it was working. With my hand on the speaker, the vibrations let me know if a radio was playing music, or crackling with static, or sitting there like a box of rocks. For me, listening to the radios was never the point. Each one of those sitting on my shelves was a reminder of something I had done right. They weren't working until I had gotten my hands on them. Whenever I fixed something, I felt like I'd won a contest. I sat down next to my bed and touched the side of the Philco 38-690 cabinet radio like I did every day when I got home and every morning before I left. Of all the antique radios in my collection, this was my favorite. Since it was almost 4 feet tall, it sat on the floor instead of a shelf like the others. It was from the 1930s, and in my professional opinion, the best radio ever made. Only 3,000 ever existed. For a long time, I had only seen the 38-690 in pictures. Then one day, there it was, behind the counter at Mr. Gunner's antique shop. My eyes almost fell out of my head when Mr. Gunner said he was going to throw it away. Sure, it was in rough shape, really rough, but I couldn't let him get rid of it. I asked if I could take it as a payment for the repair I'd brought him. He said that wouldn't be fair, so he paid me and gave me the radio. Then I felt like I sort of stealing from an old man. Even though he might change his mind, I told Mr. Gunner what the Philco could be worth if I restored it. Maybe he didn't know what he had. A cloud of dust flew up when he patted the radio's scratched wooden cabinet. If you do all the work this thing is going to need, you deserve to keep it. For the next 5 months, I worked to bring the Philco back from the dead. When I finally finished, static hummed against my palms. With the smallest turn of the dial, the smooth rhythm of music flowed from the speaker, vibrating the whole cabinet of the radio. If anyone had asked why I was sitting there crying with my arms around a radio, I wouldn't have known how to explain it. I couldn't stop thinking about how many years it had sat quietly collecting dust and how close it had come to being thrown in the garbage because no one thought it was worth listening to. Usually, I left it on overnight, even though that would wear it out faster. While I was in bed, I could reach over and feel the vibrations against my hand and fall asleep wondering who was singing and who was listening. The floor shook a little, announcing Mom coming up the stairs. I sat there waiting to find out what my punishment would be. Probably I wouldn't be allowed to use my phone or visit my friend Wendell for a while. When the door opened, I turned to her and signed, "I know, serious trouble, but..." She pointed around my room before I could explain what had happened at school wasn't my fault. "All of this," she signed, "is out of here." "What?" "Get some sheets and towels and wrap them up if you want, but as soon as Tristan gets home, you're going to help us carry everything out to the garbage." I gripped the edge of my Philco as if I could keep it from leaving my side. "No, that isn't fair." "You said you'd stay out of trouble. We warned you about this." "I didn't know you meant I'd lose my radios." I waved my arms at my collection. "I didn't know you'd take everything I have." "You're being dramatic. It isn't everything you have." "Anyway," she added before I could interrupt her, "we have to do something to get your attention. Maybe you'll take us seriously when we say you have to learn to get along with people and follow the rules. That girl's parents are really upset with the school." "It's not the school's fault or my fault. They should be mad at themselves for raising an annoying daughter." "It can't always be somebody else's fault. If people annoy you, you have to figure out a better way to deal with it." "Easy for you to say. There isn't a better way when everyone ignores you." Warm tears dampened my fingertips when my signing hands touched my face. I wiped my hands on my jeans. Just then, I remembered the Admiral set. I couldn't believe I had forgotten about it. Mom's announcement about taking my radios must have short-circuited my brain. I have to pick up a TV from the junkyard. Hopefully, she wouldn't ask why when I had been at Moe's, but I had to risk it. "No, we're not going to go out and get you a new thing to add to the exact collection you're grounded from. You have enough junk anyway." It doesn't matter that I had a lot of junk. I didn't have that particular item. I tried to explain it, but Mom turned to leave. The conversation was over. Before she walked out, I waved my hand to get her attention. "When can I have my stuff back?" "A little at a time, starting Monday." "Well, why do all weekend?" "You can visit Wendell, and we'll go to Grandma's on Saturday. You're not grounded from everything, just your electronics." Which was everything. When Tristan got home, he told me I didn't have to help carry my things. He knew how much it would hurt. "Mom and I'll take care of it." I shook my head as I slid one of my smaller radios into a pillowcase. "That's okay, but thanks." I really didn't want to do it, but I also didn't want to miss out on one more chance to hold my radios before they were put away. After we hauled all my stuff to the garage, I went back up to my room, which wasn't really my room anymore. The shelves were bare. So was the work table, which just a few hours earlier had been piled with electronic parts. A thin layer of dust outlined all that was missing. An imprint in the carpet next to my bed marked where the Philco should have been. I lay down in bed and turned towards the wall so I wouldn't have to face the emptiness. Tristan came in later to check on me. I turned when he sat on the edge of my bed and touched my shoulder. "You okay?" he signed. I rolled onto my back. "No, I will never be okay." I'm sorry. It isn't fair. I need my stuff. It's work anyway, like for Mr. Gunner. So they're grounding me from work, which is stupid. Yeah, I told Mom that. I think they want you to hang out with people instead of radios so much. I do hang out with people. Tristan didn't respond to that. Maybe he didn't believe me. He was always doing things with friends. It's just for a couple days. But if there's this but there's this radio I really need. Mom won't let me pick it up, even if I promise not to work on it yet. Where is it? Moe's. I sat up. Will you go get it for me, please? It looks heavy since it's in a cabinet with a TV and a record player, but you're strong enough to load it onto your truck. He said what looked like an and then ran a hand through his hair. Unlike me, he could do that without getting his hand stuck. He had Dad's smooth, light brown hair instead of thick, dark curls like Mom and me. All I got from Dad was pale skin that turned pink and more freckled in the sun instead of Mom's, which was tanned. Please, I signed. Do you know how many vacuum tubes are in there? No idea how many. I don't know. More than I need. I was going to go look it up. Plus, tube sockets, wires, transformers, caps. Tristan laughed and threw his hands up in surrender, which, as it happens, looked like the sign for give up. Okay, okay. But then what? You don't think Mom and Dad will notice? Hide it in the garage with everything else. Then we'll bring it up to my closet when they're not here. Okay, hold on, be right back. He signed hold like he was clutching something in his fist, not by pointing an index finger up like people do all the time, as if they were saying, wait a minute, and then never getting back to you. Tristan knew I hated that. After a few moments, Tristan came back and waved me to the door. Let's go. Me? Go where? I just chugged the last of the milk and told Mom I'd go pick up more. I jumped up and slid into my shoes. Milk wasn't the only thing we'd be picking up. Mo was back at his usual place behind the desk in the junkyard's office trailer. How was the doctor's appointment? I asked. Tristan voiced my question and Mo answered, I'm healthy as a horse. Not any horse I'd want to ride, but I wasn't going to mention that. How much for the Admiral set? Even though Tristan was there, Mo communicated with me like he always did and held up 2 fingers on one hand and 5 on the other. I pretended to consider the $25 offer, as if I wasn't desperate enough to pay for whatever he asked. Before we left home, I had grabbed 2 20s from my repair money envelope. I held up 2 fingers with one hand and formed the other into an O hand shape. Mo nodded and gave me a thumbs up and followed us outside after I handed him a 20. He helped Tristan lift the set and load it into the truck. Before hopping into the passenger seat, I shook Mo's hand and hugged Tristan. I'd have to force myself to stop smiling when we got home so Mom wouldn't wonder why I was so happy. We were pulling into the driveway when I tapped Tristan on the shoulder and signed milk, the reason for the trip as far as Mom knew. He backed up and hurried to the gas station. Want anything? He asked when we were inside. I'm almost out of gummy worms, I answered. He squeezed my shoulder and signed, pick out whatever you want. The hardest part was when we got home, Tristan always parked in the driveway since our 2-car garage had room for only 1 car and a bunch of stuff. We slid the TV onto a flattened cardboard box and shoved it in the garage, stopping a couple times along the way to give my arms a rest. Finally, we got it safely in the corner and covered it with garage junk. Tomorrow it would be in my closet where it belonged, and my room wouldn't feel so empty anymore. All right, that's where we're going to stop for the day. We will continue with chapter 8 next time. Bye, guys.